All right. Hello, hello. Welcome on in. Here we are at Unlocking the CFO's Agenda, how to keep your sales initiatives alive. We will give this a couple minutes as people file in, but we're so glad you're here with us. I guess it's morning, afternoon, all over the place here this hour, but we're glad you're choosing to spend a little bit of it with Ambition and with our team here today, which we'll introduce here very shortly. All right, it looks like, let me see here. We still have some more filing in, so let's give it just a little bit, and then since we're recording, we will hop right to it. All right. I think what numbers are settling in. Okay, cool. Well, hey, welcome everybody. My name is Mark McWaters. I lead the sales team here at Ambition. Again, thank you all very, very much for choosing to spend some time with us today. We are going to talk about a really important topic around the CFO's agenda. We even brought our own, bad guy, so to speak, the CFO, David Crenshaw, who will do a little intro here in just a second. But before we get to the CFO talk, I wanted to welcome two of our panelists, Del and Zach, who have come from MariaDB and HighSpot. We are really fortunate to have them join us here today to hear their perspective on unlocking the CFO's agenda. So without any further ado, we'll let Del introduce herself first and go to Zach before moving over to David. So Del, take it away.
Sounds good, Mark. Thank you for having me. And my name is Del Nakai. I'm the Senior Director of Global Go-to-Market Strategy, Operations, and Enablement for MariaDB, as Mark said. And right now I'm supporting the revenue organization from a revenue enablement perspective. We also have customer enablement within our team. We recently actually took on business development under my team, as well as sales operations. So a lot of different aspects of the business. With MariaDB, we are a database company, and every single piece of data interacts with a database on the back end, right? So right now, with the global economy that we have, being able to have a database that serves your need, has good uptime, has good scale, security, all of those things are really critical for our customers and some of the problems we solve, especially with our cloud database solution. Prior to MariaDB, I worked at Blackline, which is a financial technology company, and we primarily sold into the office of the CFO. So excited for this conversation today.
Thank you, Del. That's great. Zach.
Yeah, honored to be here. Thanks for having me. So Zach Miller, I'm the VP of Sales for HighSpot. I run our enterprise and strategic teams for North America. Prior to HighSpot, I was a regional VP at HRIS company, or I guess human capital management, we call it now, software company. And so I've been in sales or sales management for a long time, call it 25-ish years almost. And so selling to and with the CFO is really kind of a passion of mine. It's something that's been, I don't know, I think it's been a real skill set to be honed over time, and I'm really excited to talk about it today. Specifically, HighSpot is a revenue enablement platform. We effectively let the revenue leaders of an organization, equip, train, and coach the customer-facing teams so that they can actually land the strategic initiatives and drive sales productivity, drive product launches, any type of initiatives that might need to happen. So that's why we exist in the world. But happy to be here. Super excited for the conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. And HighSpot, a good partner of Ambition as well. Well, let's introduce our CFO, David Crenshaw. I'm really excited that he's joining us. Not too many CFOs are trying to hop on webinars these days, and this is a really important topic. I know for me as a sales leader, we even had David, and we'll talk about this as we get there, come talk to the sales team. So David, give an intro for yourself here.
Well, thanks for having me, Mark. I feel like us CFOs, we usually don't get invited to things like this because we have minimal amounts of personality. So I feel very encouraged that I'm trending in the right direction there. But yes, David Crenshaw, CFO of Ambition. My background is in finance, legal, HR, compliance. I've seen a lot of it. I've run technology companies from anywhere from $5 million in revenue to over 100 and then exiting it. So I'm very much in tune with the procurement process, what we're going to buy, what we're not going to buy, how do we get to know faster, which we'll talk about that in a little bit, but feel honored to be here.
Thank you, David. And also has law degree, accounting degree. David's one of those people who's got a lot of letters after his name. You know, us sales folks don't tend to have that as much. So I think he's bringing a unique perspective too, because he has sat in so many of those seats, and at Ambition, you know, plays a multitude of roles as well. So, all right.
And he's proved that he actually does have personality. So that was kind of ironic, I have to say, David.
Just a little. Okay. Well, let's frame up this challenge. And again, for a lot of our audience, a lot of sales leaders, sales executives, revenue leaders. If you're like me, in the last 6 to 9 months, you've certainly been in many more conversations with the CFO as the buyer. And this is a stat here from Forrester talking about roughly 6 in 10 decisions these days are being made with the CFO as the final decision maker. You know, speaking from Ambition's point of view, and me and my role often getting brought in later to have conversations with someone like a CFO, I might argue that 6 in 10 is pretty low. And knowing Zach sits in a pretty similar seat that I do, Zach, when you see 61% that the CFO is the final decision maker, where's your gut on that?
Well, if you tweak the language just a little bit and said is a final decision maker and has veto power, and if you also said, you know, that you know about, then it would be 100. It should be 100%. Really, like it's literally every deal these days. Like it's 61% that you know about, but it's 100% they're involved. Like absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like just about all of them from our perspective, and the reasoning, and we'll talk more about this as we get into more and more meet with David, is that when economy is like it is right now, and finance is leaning further and further in to spend, both reducing expenses and bringing on new spend, CFO wants to be involved in ways like they haven't previously been. That threshold that maybe they didn't need to be involved has now lowered. And so seeing here that Forrester backing this is 61% certainly adds up and might even be a little low from my take. Del, how about from your seat at MariaDB? Just quick gut check. 6 in 10, CFO being decision maker. How's that sound?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds pretty accurate. I think that the challenge is that we primarily sell to the IT department and operations department. So sometimes the biggest challenge is just buyer enablement and helping them navigate their internal purchasing processes, especially if there's no procurement department that helps manage that for them. So I think that's a bigger challenge for us, is just being able to help the buyer navigate their internal processes.
Yep. Amen. Amen. All right, great. Let's keep moving. Okay. So we're also going to continue to talk about just more of the CFO role and, you know, what drivers have we seen most recently in sales conversations? And so by what drivers do we mean is what is actually being evaluated these days? And like, what is the initiative? What is the conversation like in the boardroom, in the C-suite, in the executive roundtable that is leading for us technology purchases? And for the audience, maybe there's some folks that aren't in technology, but here you see, to orient you, the dark green being technology purchases, the light green being non-tech. And you can see they really follow each other in terms of importance for the most part. You know, improve efficiency being the #1 business driver behind a purchase. Whether you're in tech or not, that's a really important conversation right now. Zach said this well in our prep conversation of efficiency, essentially saying do more with the same or less. And that has become such an important part of what is actually being considered right now. But also seeing things around productivity and cost reduction. I know a big talking point for our team and a lot of softwares in our space has been just how do you do more with less? And I think there's definitely a message in this data set that do more with less continues to be an important priority of the business, and of course, an important priority of the CFO. So, Del, when you look at these, any of these jump out at you as being particularly kind of top of mind for the team over at MariaDB, and curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, both from an internal perspective, as far as upskilling and upleveling our revenue organization, but also from a selling perspective, we're really focusing on sales methodology and qualification right now, and tying in our value drivers, and all of the value drivers we focus on are tied into these different categories. So no surprises from that perspective. The key for us is how do we really identify the business impact, whether it's positive or negative, for them not to make a change, not to make a decision around making a change. And how do we really make the business case, especially when it comes to a CFO? That's going to be what ultimately sells it, is does it align to their objectives? And especially thinking about different opportunities through what are the corporate objectives of that particular account they're going after. That's another thing that we're encouraging our sellers to really be focusing on.
This is so top of mind for me, Del. I mean, being able to quantify the problem versus being just quantifying the impact of your solution. I'll give, I may mispronounce his last name, but Nate Nasrallah is a guy on LinkedIn that I have followed and talks a lot about buyer journey. And he really taught me the concept of a problem statement and being able to work through with your prospective buyer of really what problem are you solving? How do we quantify that problem? But how do we put it in a very digestible format? So who's being impacted? How often are they being impacted? What is the implication of that problem? What are they losing? And so when the story gets told to a CFO, it's less about the ROI they may or may not believe, and more about the problem that is being solved. So thank you for sharing. All right, Zach, I know you guys play a lot in this too. Curious to hear when you hear, efficiency, productivity, reduction in cost, that ring true?
Yeah, to your last statement about the ROI that, maybe the CFO does or doesn't believe. Funny story. We had our CFO come in and talk to our entire sales group too. And he was hilarious. He says, if I had gotten all of the ROI that had been promised on ROI slide decks over the last, 10 years at HighSpot, we would be like a $10 billion company right now. And so you just want to be cautious about that at some level, right? But no, absolutely. So we had a board member come in and talk to our leadership teams last week, and we had a leadership SKO, and she was basically talking about how literally in every board meeting that she's in, and in every executive conversation that she's in, these topics are absolutely top of mind, right? Driving efficiency, driving we've gone away from growth at all costs to efficient growth, and that it was really a pep talk for everybody in our group. We're thinking, wow, revenue enablement, gosh, how does sales training, or how do those play with this? Like, literally, this is exactly what you do. You get salespeople producing more revenue for the same costs, right? This is literally 6 out of 10 things on this slide. And so that was a really invigorating message to hear for us last week, for sure.
Absolutely. That sounds like a galvanizing moment, and to hear it from inside the room, so to speak, is pretty critical. All right, so let's hit one more of these, I believe, and then we're going to get into picking David's brain and have him talk about kind of how he evaluates the situation. And another cool stat that we found that just helps support more and more of kind of what a CFO is paying attention to is what content do they believe is meaningful in their evaluations. And so, as a career sales guy, I was pretty excited to see sales presentation in the top. That was a little surprising to me on the technology evaluation. But then also you see things like case studies, articles, a web page or a report. I think if there's one takeaway when I look at this, it's that the lower down you get, the more long form it is. And when you're trying to bring in a CFO or an SVP of finance, they're not trying to understand how the sausage is made necessarily. Like they're trying to come in and validate the big important reason why or why not this should be evaluated. And so working through a sales presentation or a case study certainly adds up and seems like something that David might pay attention to. But let's keep moving and get into our next quick piece around what parts of the market are being evaluated most right now. And this is particular to the Controllers Council, and I think they removed finance tools as part of what was put into this. But cybersecurity being number one. So I think we've got some of that represented on the call today. We'll get to that in just a second. But cybersecurity, cloud platforms, data storage, even in an environment where purchases seem harder, sales cycles are lengthening. These groups here, CRM automation, project management, e-commerce, collaboration, are continuing to be in the conversation today. And what we pulled from the group that registered ahead of time, and lucky for us, we've got a lot of these represented here this afternoon. And so, if you're in one of these, you might be thinking, Mark, like it's not that easy. Like you're framing it up like I'm on easy street over here. It's still really tough. But it's good that your industry is still top of mind for a CFO. Really, the way I think about that is that someone like David isn't surprised when something like you in those industries come to his desk, right? And that being on his radar, I think is a really important part of greasing the skids, so to speak, to having the right conversation with a senior finance leader. So hopefully this helps frame up a little bit of the bigger CFO role and what's being evaluated from the market perspective. But what I'm most excited about is we are bringing our own CFO, as we said, to discuss how he looks at these things. Zach mentioned earlier that he brought the High Spot CFO to talk to his sales team, and at Ambition we did the same, because we are having dozens and dozens of conversations about how to do this the right way with the prospective CFO we're going to meet with, and it's like, hey, why don't we just grab our guy and ask him anything? So David, now is when you become the superstar of our conversation. And but guys, important note, I told David to be real. Like the purpose of this isn't that he's going to come in and tell you that it's all BS and CFOs want to spend money. Like he's going to come in and tell you how he really thinks about evaluating a purchase. And then Zach, Dell, and I are going to ask questions as he moves through. We also have a Q&A that will happen. So questions have been sent in ahead of time. I think I just saw a couple pop into chat. So please, if you have questions for David, by all means, put those down in the chat. After we walk through some of these key pieces first, we're going to get to questions and really open this up to more of how a CFO, deals with perhaps your specific question that comes to mind. So we really circled around three things that have been moving lately. One is this change from value to performance. Two is the change from quality to revenue. And three is the shift from power to true cost reduction. So with that, David, let me pass it to you, and let's hear what's on your mind.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And thanks everyone for being here. A couple slides ago, seeing all the folks that have registered and the different backgrounds that everyone has, I'd probably put a large swath of this group that's in on this webinar in kind of three buckets. One would be kind of that risk bucket, like we've got a solution, cybersecurity, that you cannot afford not to have. One would be an efficiency spend reduction bucket. We've got a solution that will help you decrease your costs. And the other bucket would be a revenue increase bucket. We can help you make more money. And so I think all of this is going to triangulate in the same spot here as far as how I think about it. And I'm sure as far as how Zach and Dell CFOs think about it too. It's funny, us CFOs, we're pretty interchangeable. We all come back to the same budget, the same P&L, the same board every single year. So There might be some that, dress better than I do. This is a rental jacket I'm gonna have to return. But at the end of the day, we're all managing to a P&L. And so that's kind of going to be my refrain for this group and this audience. When you think about, all of the things of value drivers to purchase something, any solution, whether it's going to fall into the bucket of managing risk, decreasing spend, or increasing revenue, the word value gets thrown around a lot. I really don't like it when somebody outside of Ambition, another company, tells me that their solution is valuable. Because what is valuable is what's valuable for me as the CFO of Ambition, what Ambition needs. And so that's really where I'm focused. So instead of valuable, this solution maybe will help increase the performance of your company. And here's how. The how on that performance increase is pretty critical. If you think of somebody like me, I wouldn't be involved in sort of the initial scoping of whatever the solution is, because I really want to trust the frontline manager or whoever the initial contact was to know their business domain and what they need and the tools that they need to solve their business problems that we at Ambition and I have hired them to do. So if you think of moving more towards, hey, this is an actual performance metric increase for your business, that resonates a lot better than saying, hey, this is a valuable tool. That's really, really cool. Valuable tool. Cryptocurrency is valuable, but sometimes it's not really valuable for me at Ambition though. So that terminology is pretty critical. Kind of moving down to the next one, quality. Candidly, for somebody like me as a CFO, if I'm looking at a tech stack of a product, I am not qualified to know if it's quality or not. I have a background in debits and credits. And so I'm really trusting my first line manager to say, hey, this is a quality tool. And that quality is sort of expected. What I really want to hear more is, hey, it's quality, it's going to work, but here's how it's going to drive revenue and performance. Here's how it's going to drive what we need to hit as a budget target for this year. And I'll pause on this point just for a second, because I think this is a critical one. I know everybody on this call knows the term champion and needing a champion at your prospective target. The way I look at champions, and I'll pick on Mark as our host here, if Mark is championing something, what makes me really believe him is if he is willing to put his number on the line for it, whatever that number is. If I've got a cost reduction number on him, or if I've got a revenue increase number on it, if he's got a budget target, if he's willing to say, hey, I cannot achieve this number without this tool, or we cannot mitigate this risk without this solution, then I'm really interested, because now all of a sudden our high-level sales leader is telling me he has to have this tool and he's willing to put his number on the line for it. It's sort of like if you want to use the phrase, cannot afford to have it. What I want to understand is, why can we afford not to have it? Why do we have to have this tool, if that makes sense? And then the last piece of it, and this shouldn't be any surprise, I guess, when you're selling to a CFO who's ultimately signing off on the budget, power. Your tool could be the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I hope this does not sound callous, but I don't really care. There's a lot of great tools out there. What I care is if there's a cost reduction impact, if there's a revenue increase impact, if this is going to help us hit our board targeted budgets. And so like Zach mentioned in his CFO, the ROI is great and those numbers are important to have. That champion signing up for that ROI, that internal champion signing up for that ROI is what I care about even more. So I'll maybe pause there, Mark, and maybe Zach and Del, if you guys want to comment on what you've seen or if that resonates in your companies.
Well, the one thing that pops out to me is you're kind of explaining the jolt effect. I don't know if you guys have come across that book recently by Matt Dixon, but he's basically talking about the reason why people are more averse to making a decision, period. And standing behind, the ROI or the potential cost of that solution is definitely a big challenge now. So you're adding to the problem, but I totally get it.
And I hate to say it, Del, but I think the market trend is going to be more and more Davids adding to that problem as we kind of enter into more of an uncertain economic time. the pressure from boards on their CFOs, the pressure from shareholders on their CFOs, the pressure from senior management on their CFOs is to really start to drill down into efficiencies, cost savings, and how do we, as Zach said, rightly so, do more with less. And
Yeah.
so if you see that kind of compression there, that's definitely where it's coming from.
Yeah, and it's necessary, right? Especially, I think the biggest challenge I see is with a very technical solution like a database solution. How do you navigate that internally with a buyer who is very technical, who doesn't fully have all the numbers around the business and what needs to be focused on and reduced or made more efficient? So that's something we've been focusing on with our sellers, is really making sure that you're having those conversations. And if your champion is not able to have that kind of conversation, is that really your champion, or do you just need to bring in more people as far as the group of buyers that we need to be engaging with? So totally understandable. And it's more a matter of like, how do we make sure our sellers are having those conversations?
Yeah, one of the things that stood out to me is, as a seller, we often are prepping a champion. And, in that prep meeting, you were working with them on the impact and the rollout and who's going to own this. And one of the questions that happens more and more now that David said is, well, hey, Mark, what happens if we don't do this? Right. And like, are you prepping? Hopefully you're in the conversation, but let's be real. CFO doesn't really want to meet with the seller. They are going to want to meet with their internal person. And is that internal person ready to defend what happens if you do nothing? And that I have seen in sales teams where it's like, oh, that's too tough to really broach. Like, that's not fun. It's like, actually, that's more of the real conversation now. So if your champion isn't ready to answer that, then your deal's likely at risk.
We were just talking about this yesterday, actually, in a methodology pilot group I'm running. And we were talking about, we asked the questions why, we asked the question why now. We need to be asking the question, what would cause you to not make a change, not make a decision? So having those very real conversations and trying to dig into that, I think, can be very valuable.
Yeah, Dave, I'm kind of curious for your thoughts on this. When I think about value, right, I think of the old equation. It's like revenue minus cost, kind of divided by risk, right? And that, like, if a CFO's job is ultimately to figure out how to fund the future growth and value of the company, it's actually not just cutting costs. It's investing in revenue, like minus the cost, and then trying to figure out what's the risk of this thing actually happening like this, and how do I de-risk this idea or this project. And so I think that's really freeing, and it's like, it's kind of nice to know. Well, first off, I'm curious, like, is that valid? Is that how you think?
I think that's very fair. Yeah, absolutely, Zach. That value coming from increased revenues, cost reduction. There's a risk and exposure piece, and I know we have several cybersecurity folks on this call. That exposure piece is pretty critical too. So yes, I'm absolutely with you.
So I think, like, part of that, and whether it's pure risk of like risk to the business or risk of the thing that you say is going to happen when you're pitching not happening, like, how do I de-risk that for you to make it this is a no-brainer, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can count on the thing that I'm pitching to you actually happening, right? So somewhat like me de-risking a deal that I'm pitching to you, I think is pretty important. But I think ultimately the cool thing that's really cool as I think about this and really freeing, I think, for salespeople, is that these are very logical decisions, right? A lot of times it's difficult to sell on emotional stuff, but like, these are very logical decisions. These are very like nuts and bolts math stuff, and when it can be justified, then it makes sense, and we do it, right? And so I think that's just to kind of say, hey, the CFO isn't that scary. Like, David, you're not a scary guy. You're actually a logical, pretty funny guy, and even if you haven't rent your suits, I think you're pretty snappily dressed. So
I can't wait for whoever joined this because they're trying to sell Ambition something to hit up David afterwards with a joke. Maybe that's your in. Sorry, Dell, you're about to say something.
No, it's okay. To Zach's point, David, I'm curious, what would make you feel like there's less risk with actually moving forward with a purchase?
Mhm. So a couple of things, Del, and that's a great question. I will tell you, one of the biggest things for me personally would be if I know another CFO in my market that is using it, because I hear a success story. I hear an implementation that has gone well. I hear snappy on-time customer support. I hear a success story where it worked going to market and where this tool is now functioning and in practice. Because if I can hear another CFO who is a disinterested party tell me this was a successful solution for us and we like it, then that's really valuable to me. And I'll give you an example, Dale. So Ambition here, based in Nashville, Tennessee, I run a CFO network. It's kind of Southeast based, and there's about 100 of us CFOs in this group. We meet together monthly, either virtually, we try to do it in person. But essentially what those conversations become are fill in the blank questions. Have you ever encountered this cybersecurity risk? And what did you do about it? And who did you use? That recommendation from peer to peer is so much more valuable to me than any sort of interested party sales pitch, so to speak. So that would be kind of number one. That's your highest and best standard right there, if you've got an advocate outside of the company. Internal to that, though, too, if it's somebody who somebody at Ambition that really believes in the solution, needs the solution, whatever it is, if they're willing to champion it, put some dollars and cents on the line, being willing to give up budget that they're already spending on other things because they want to replace a tool for something else, that to me is a big win. I'll take that all day long, because then your champion is accountable for their budget, their understanding of the spend, and then they believe in the product or solution that they're buying. That would be kind of a close second for me.
Yeah, you're touching on something that I try to champion within our sales organization, which is selling with stories. There's so much value in that. And having those proof points, I think, can be really impactful. I know we were talking about what are the pieces of content that a CFO would want to consume. I would caution our sellers and sales leaders to say maybe the presentation includes more of those case studies than just purely a presentation where we're talking at the customer. So I just think there's so much value in that, because it brings in some of the things we have on the screen here with the performance and increase in revenue and tying all of that in based on existing customers' experiences.
Yeah, that slide should have qualified like good presentation.
Right.
Like, bad presentation probably didn't cut it.
Yeah, we're just peddling bad sales presentations out here. David, how about definitely takeaway so far for me is like the puts and takes. You gotta, when you make an ask, you gotta be ready for the volley back of like how you're gonna fund it, and maybe there's something you can take away. But what about just credibility of the person asking? Like, I'm thinking if I'm, prospective seller and I hear that, oh, I tried to buy these 4 other tools and nothing got through, but I'm going to go take Ambition forward now. Like, my hunch is that's probably not going to go very well either, because like this person just keeps asking for every new shiny thing. In your experience, has that been a big piece of your trust and blessing of a buy?
That's a great question, Mark. And you're absolutely right. Market Ambition asks for 10 things every single quarter versus another sales leader asks for one once a year. I'm going to more go with the person who is really thought through instead of the volume player, so to speak. But that would be just kind of a knee-jerk reaction. What I would probably say, and this is the thoughtful response, taking Ambition, for example, and we're on a budget, of course, like every company here, and we're trying to hit certain targets. But really, the CFO, every single good CFO is going to be willing to say yes to anything. It could be crypto, it could be horse farm, it could be bourbon distillery, it could be anything. If you have a champion who's willing to stand behind the ROI and prove that theory out, any good CFO is going to say yes to making more money or reducing costs. So it's not really what the solution is, it's what the solution does and how you can effectively communicate that, no matter what it is. Because as smart as we like to consider ourselves, because we look at numbers all day and then stare at our shoes all night, we're really concerned with how we're going to make more money for this business and trusting our frontline folks to say, hey, this is a solution that helps us do that.
So thinking of like more on credibility too, how do you how do you view, hey, I come make an ask and I've piloted this piece, I have our specific numbers. Is that a requirement in your eyes? How do you perceive that test? And I guess, would you be willing to approve without a test, would be a related question.
I think if I understand your question correctly, the answer is yes. Would I be willing to approve without a test of or a pilot of whatever solution? Absolutely. At the end of the day, as CFOs, we're not going to be the experts on cybersecurity, HIPAA compliance, Stark Act, if we have any healthcare folks here, cost reduction, efficiency stuff. You know, we're not going to be the experts on everything. What we really are looking for is an accountability from that champion. A budget would be a good example. Like, we're taking costs away from a certain project because we really believe in the value of this one. That would be one of the good examples. And that credibility is built over time, for sure. And so Mark is one of our top sales leaders. And so his credibility is going to be more meaningful to me than somebody who's just been in the door 3 months. And so that's a great call out. That credibility is incredibly important.
Yeah, I think that goes back to de-risking that deal, right? That's like another way to de-risk the deal. Like, one could be another referral from a CFO in your network. The other could be, we've piloted this thing. We've got some great initial numbers, so we know that it's working as billed, right? The other thing that struck me, you know, Del, you referred to the buyer enablement piece a little bit ago, like really equipping that, you know, in your scenario here, really equipping Mark to come to you with that ask, right? I'm curious though, like, I think I probably already know the answer, but I'm curious for the benefit of everybody here, like, how often do you actually take meetings with salespeople, or how many times is this somebody internally like Mark coming to say, I want to do this, and getting your blessing?
Great question, Zach. And Mark told me to be honest. So the answer to your question, how often do I take meetings with sales folks? The answer is as little as possible. It's just, I am predisposed to say no because we've got a budget to hit, and reducing costs is part of that. So the answer is as little as possible. And it's not because, I hope it's not because somebody like me is just a grade A jackass. I hope it's because, you know, I'm focused on the numbers and I trust my frontline people to make a good decision. And when they think it's a good decision, then we're syncing internally on that.
Right. But that you won't meet with them doesn't mean that deal can't get across the line, right? Just, we have to position it with some, so that Mark can help you understand why we need to get it across the line.
Exactly. And that brings up a great point. I'm glad you're asking that question, Zach. So taking and playing out your example, if my frontline leader, like a Mark, is not making me aware of a deal that is potentially financially meaningful along the way, that's probably going to be a problem, because at the last minute before a board meeting, if there's a substantial spend ask, the answer is going to be no matter how good the solution is, because wasn't informed along the way, haven't forecasted for it, and it's not going to hit our P&L right. But that informative nature along the way of the process of, hey, we like it, we're piloting it, here's the initial cost scope, we're going to sharpen our pencils, that along the way is very, very helpful in greasing the skids, and really helps come to a solution of yes quicker.
Yeah,
So Dave,
go ahead.
sorry, go ahead, Zach.
I was just gonna say, so no surprises, is that what you're saying?
Exactly. No surprises. Surprises are a CFO's worst nightmare. Remember, we are not cool, sexy people. We spend our time looking at our shoes.
Yeah, I was going to ask a follow-up question to that. So when we start asking about budget with our buyers, that is something that sometimes shuts them down. It's like, oh, you're just trying to sell to me. I don't want to get into that yet. From a buyer enablement perspective, what is your guidance to sellers as far as how they can help their champions navigate those conversations internally?
That's a great question, Del. And you're right. I'm not surprised that might turn some folks off. I understand it from a sales side. Like, you want to understand, is this customer in your ICP? Can they really afford the solution that I'm offering? Or are we just way on different pages and we need to kind of cut bait and move on? I understand why that is valuable. I would liken that question though to, if anybody's ever gone in and bought a car recently, or an engagement ring or something like that, first thing that salesperson, when you walk in the store, is going to ask you is, well, what are you looking to spend? And that question automatically triggers all kinds of red flags, red bells, flashing lights, and sirens, because the answer is I'm looking to spend as little as possible and do more with less. So that process is a really delicate one. I think it's a fair one because the sales team needs to know, hey, have I hit my customer mark? But at the same time, if it comes across as, hey, I'm trying to understand how much spend you have so I can extract as much blood out of you as possible, then that's kind of one of those big turnoffs.
Yeah. But it seems like though that the same question could be just asked two different ways. One way would be really off-putting and is like the one that salespeople don't want to ask, which is, do you have budget for this project yet? Right? It's like, of course, that's just the other way could be, hey, your CFO is probably going to be approving something whenever you do it. CFOs hate surprises. Have you looped in the FP&A team? Have you looped in the CFO to this? Like, do they know we're talking? Right? Those are two different questions, and like to basically get to the same piece of information, right?
That's a great point.
Yeah, totally. And one of the great conversations I've had, Zach, recently was someone at Ambition who brought something to me and said, you know, are we on the same wavelength as far as it could be in this sort of range? It could be in a smaller range. What does that kind of look like? And then it wasn't a question of how much do we have to spend, you know?
Yeah. But I don't think budget really works the way it did 20 years ago, right? Where you say, okay, you know, Mark, you've got X millions of dollars to go spend this year. It's kind of zero base, right? It's like there's never really that budget granted until Mark has you've agreed to do the thing, right? So isn't it more about keeping you in the loop, or am I off base there?
You're absolutely spot on, Zach. And I think I'll say this from my perspective, having done several tech companies now, I'll take it to the HR world. So like backfilling roles, you could be making $1 billion a year, Apple in California, and you're selling a ton of iPhones. There are no automatic backfills at Apple. You have to justify that new role every single time, no matter if somebody left, retired, whatever it was. It is really justifying spend every single time over and over. Or as you said, rightly so, Zach, that's zero-based budgeting, regardless of if you're making a ton of money or if times are really tight.
This is great, y'all. David, thank you so far. We got Q&A coming up. I know we got some more questions that I'm going to hop into here. We got one from the audience here from John for you, David. All right. How different would these concepts be when selling to a city manager or a city budget manager compared to a corporate CFO? I don't know, in your network of CFOs, you have anybody on that side, and would there be a difference based on what you understand?
I can hit you there, John. From my experience, and I'm going to make some generalizations, so you know, take this for what it's worth. I would say maybe your high growth companies, your private equity, venture capital backed companies, even your public companies, they're going to be very, very focused on their directives from the board. When you start getting into selling to government, city, local, state, whatever it is, regulatory boards, things like that, they operate, in my experience, the opposite of what Zach was describing. So not zero based, but more of a, hey, I've got a budget approved for the year. It's $1 million. And if I don't spend it, I lose it. So that use it or lose it concept is a very different buyer than most of the folks probably on this call, which for us at Ambition, I'm making Mark justify every single dollar of spend he has throughout the year. So that's a great question. They're coming from like totally separate ends of the atmosphere. One's Pluto, the other's Mercury.
Awesome. Hope that was helpful, John. We've got another question here from Andrew. He says, curious, how are revenue teams educating CFOs about what they really need? How are they ensuring alignment between revenue team needs and CFO needs? So I think really anybody can hop in here. What I think about is, David, like, has there been any content or education, or, you know, we talked about like what CFOs are paying attention to. Can you think of one that had you lean in lately that wasn't just your network group? I'm curious if anything has drawn you in.
Sure. Well, a great example would be even a Salesforce tool that probably most folks on this call are using. So that is multifunctional. I use it all the time, all day, every day, because it has meaning for me, from contracting to orders to revenue to forecasting, things like that. So if it's multifunctional, I'm definitely leaning in. A lot of times, though, at least what I've seen from our sales teams, is they have more specific needs, more specific tools, more specific vendors that they like to use. And at the end of the day, I'll probably harken back, and I'm curious what Dell, you and Zach think about this, but I would harken back to my point earlier of me as CFO, I'm willing to approve anything from horses to crypto to bourbon distilleries. If it's going to make us more money or cause cost reductions, let's have that conversation. And even if it's not in the budget, I would take it a step further and go find budget for it if it's that good, if somebody's willing to stand behind it.
Yeah, Andrew, that's a great question. I think from my perspective, the way I think about it is positioning anything that you need and educating your internal CFOs or helping your your customers justify to it's about productivity and efficiency, right? So it's not, oh, we're going to grow by a gajillion dollars. We're going to protect our revenue growth trajectory, right? We're going to do that for less cost than we were doing before because we're going to displace these other things, or we're going to have some other mitigation of cost or some other mitigation of risk, right? But positioning it in a way that is really locked into that value equation, I think, is really, really critical. Whether you're selling the deal internally for something that you need for your revenue teams, right? Because let's be honest, like we still have to invest. We cannot cut our way to growth. That just doesn't work. You have to invest to grow. But the critical thing is to position that in a way that, again, whether it's your CFO or the CFO in the organization that you're selling to, understands that as a productivity and efficiency driver that ultimately is going to drive profitability and value. I think if you can key to that, you're going to probably be in a good place.
And I would just add, from an internal perspective, as long as everything you're doing ties into, from a broader corporate perspective, what we're trying to accomplish, that ultimately is the key there. So for us, one of the things we're focusing on is decreasing the cost of sales and focusing on 2 of our strategic products. So from an investment perspective, we're going to support our sellers to even go in person and meet with a customer, potentially run an event, do a webinar, whatever that is, when it's tied into those corporate objectives. So from an internal perspective, that's what we're really looking at.
All right, we got time for 2 more questions. I'm going to hit these 2. First one, great topic, believable ROI. Is there such a thing? David, you take this first. What's the best way to present returns to a CFO?
Great question, Mark. So the ROI, and great question from whoever put that in the chat. I'm sorry, I can't see your name. I think when I see an ROI from a sales deck, I'm not believing it. I'm predisposed to say no. I'm the CFO, I'm supposed to mitigate costs. But what really makes more sense to me is when you have that internal champion who's saying, hey, I cannot afford not to have this because I'm not going to hit this revenue target without it. So that ROI number, I'm already assuming that if you're using Gartner or Parthenon or XY or whatever the survey company is that is coming back with that ROI number, it's probably a pretty favorable inflated ROI. I would liken it to my handicap. My handicap is a 7 right now. It's actually probably more like a 12. That's just part of the game.
How about that for transparency?
And I think we all kind of know that, right? And so, but that does not mean that I'm not out of the realm of possibilities on something. So when I see ROI, it's great. Okay, it's positive. Who's my champion? Do I believe their credibility? Are they willing to stand behind it in their budget or financially somehow? And can they not afford to live without it? Like, are we going to miss numbers because I said no to this tool? that gets me very motivated to say yes.
That question was from Randy. So great question, Randy. Sorry, Zach, go ahead.
No, I was going to layer on there for a second that I think if to David's point, like, are we going to miss if we don't have this, is the first part. And then I always think about having a very, very conservative. It's less about ROI. It's almost like cost justification. And can I make this thing pencil? Can I Can I offload some other spend? Can I, can I get to, a really low bar to where, if we don't have this thing, we're going to fail. And it's a very low bar. I can make it pencil. Is much different than I'm going to get you $1 billion of ROI, right? You're just going to write that offhand. So I think there's a subtle play there. I've also found just over a lot of years that if it's me or the salesperson or even the internal champion saying, this is what we're going to do, it tends to be not believable. If we say, if we were able to increase our sales product, our conversion rate by 3%, that would equal this many dollars. I believe that using this tool effectively, we can get at least a 1%, which would pay for it, right? So it's more about that sort of, if we were, yes, it could be a treadmill. I could buy it and hang my clothes on it, and we're not going to get any value from it, right? But if I were to get on it every day and run for an hour, I know that I would have this effect in the end, right? So then, when you have that combined with Mark signing up for, I need this thing and I'm going to drive the usage of it, I think that becomes a much more compelling ROI story, in my opinion, and what I've seen work over many years.
Okay, last question here before we get to our wrap. Steve hopped in and said, how does that champion prove to you? I think this was to David's. Prove to you they can't live without it. Is taking more target quota the only way?
That's a great one, Steve. I mean, you can take on more target quota. That's one way. I've also seen, if you're willing to shift your budget, say we have this one tool, but I really can live without that. I cannot live without this. That would be another big way. There's also some cross-functional collaboration there too. So I know here at Ambition, our sales team's working hand in hand with marketing, of course, but they do work hand in hand with product engineering as well, and our success teams as well. And so I've seen great collaboration between our leaders saying, hey, we really need this tool. It's multifunctional. We're willing to take away and give more to sales and take some out of product budget to support this tool, because we really believe we can hit our total overall goal that way. So that would be another way to say it too. I think the hardest ask that you can have for your CFO when you're coming for a request for spend is there's no budget reduction, there's no quota increase, there's maybe some revenue increase, there's maybe some cost increase, but there's nobody that's really accountable for those two. And that's the hardest ask you can ask me.
Puts and takes. All right, David, I'm adding one more real quick, because I remember you said this to our team, and I think the group needs to hear this too. When someone says, hey, we're on a budget freeze, true or false? Or actually, let's frame this differently. We're on a budget freeze. Is that subjective or objective?
No such thing as a budget freeze. There is no such thing. Because if there is a great mousetrap out there that is going to make us a lot of money or find a way to reduce a lot of costs, we're going to find a way to buy it. Whether we have to take out personal loans to buy it, we're going to go raise equity, we're going to raise debt, we will find a way to get that tool. So there's no such thing as a budget freeze. There is definitely such a thing as we've got a budget and it's pretty tight.
Yep. All right, there's your inspiration from our CFO. That freeze is fake. Go create some value or some outcomes, performance. All right, let's talk about how we're going to be greater. This is how we have wrapped up each of these webinars, and talk about one thing that we're going to do personally or professionally to be greater in 2023. Del, I'm going to come to you first. Tell us, what's one thing you're going to do to be greater this year?
So I started out this year, and it just kind of naturally came up where this is the year of hard truths. And it applies in multiple different contexts. From a seller perspective, what I would say is what got you here won't get you there. Buying behavior is changing. We need to adapt. We need to be mindful about our conversations with our buyers and ultimately how we're qualifying our opportunities. So that's how we're going to be greater.
Love it. Love it. Thank you for sharing, Del. All right, Zach, you're up.
Let's see, how am I going to be greater? I'm going to focus on fundamentals with my teams this year, and just getting really good at the fundamental core skills of our craft selling, and really try to drive those home this year. That's how I'm going to do it.
Excellent. Back to the fundamentals. David, other than getting that 7 handicap to be real, how do you plan on being greater this year?
I have 2. So number 1 would be laser focused on budget, hitting budget and transparency towards that across all our leadership team at Ambition. So we're all rowing in the same direction, working off the same numbers, and everybody's seeing it. My second goal would be to get and finish the potty training for my youngest child this weekend.
As a father of 3, I may have a couple of recommendations for you. That kid just doesn't need to wear pants this weekend. That's kind of how it works. That is awesome. I will add, I've recently been just kind of on a kick about transparency sale and being really direct. And I want to specifically add that one thing we're trying to do to be a greater team this year is just be really honest about fit. Don't try to sell to everybody. Try to sell and target those that will benefit most. And what we've already seen some early returns of that being really beneficial and people appreciating our point of view versus just come through the door and we'll sell you whatever you're interested in. And I think that level of honesty, to Del's point, is just refreshing, and it helps people lean in or out on whether Ambition is the right fit for them. So, all right, team, Zach, Del, David, thank you so much to everybody who came. Thank you for joining us. I hope you found this as really beneficial. The recording is on its way to your inbox once this thing processes, downloads. But we know spending an hour with us is a big ask, so we really hope you have some takeaways. I'm sure you can find all of us on LinkedIn if you want to reach out directly. But everybody have a great rest of your Thursday, and we look forward to you coming to the next one. Have a great day.
Thank you.